Well, let me say this. When we were children, she was very quiet about it. We just knew that she had been in the orphanage. And I remember as a child, we used to have company from out of town or something, and they'd come to the house and they start talking and telling their stories. And I was in the other room. But my ears were always open and I could hear all these different stories. They didn't want to tell it in front of the children. They spoke softly and, just talked about their hardships. And they also wanted to know from one another who survived, who died. They didn't know, who was left. So it would be like me living in Salem and you living in Peabody or something and knowing each other's, very well. And you would ask me, did so-and-so survive, my friend from Salem or Peabody, whatever it is, So that's how they got their information, was from one another. But no, I have to say that no, she didn't, talk about it from day one. But little by little, she did. Her mother, her father, her sister-in-law, her baby niece were taken from her household. There were other relatives too that died in that genocide, but I don't know numbers and I don't know who. It's like, I grew up with no grandparents at all. And I used to envy the kids when they talked about their grandparents, and I had none, And, this whole thing affects us. I was affected by my mother's life. And I remember when I was a little child, I remember thinking that she went through a lot of hardship and sadness, and that I was going to make her happy, and I always took care of my mother and tried to do everything I could for her, and I just wanted her to be happy because she had a lot of losses, at a young age. And when the Turks came and took her family, they didn't take the 3 little children that were home. They had 2 other siblings that one had come to America and one had gone to Beirut in 1912 because they knew there was going to be an uprising of sorts. They went away to make money to be able to bring their family to this country, as well as my father, who didn't know my mother then. He had a wife and a son, and maybe I'm going off a little bit, but he also lost his mother, his father, his wife, his son, and also his brother, who was named Peter. And I didn't know, I never knew he had a brother as a child growing up until I was about 15 or 16. It was just by accident I found out. But we never talked about it. I never asked my father about it because he never said a word. Never said a word. I know it was a big loss for him. And that's how my brother Peter got his name. But anyways, when they threw my mother's family in jail, she went to see her father. And she says he was in chains. And he says, my daughter, whatever you do, do not come back here because they will kill you. Because he knew that they were going to be killed. He says, go back home. He says, I have money buried in the ground in the backyard. Go there, dig it up, and go to the Turkish neighbor next door, which was a little distance, and he'll know what to do. So she did that. She took her 2 younger siblings, and they went to this Turkish man's house. And he sent one of them to another home because they didn't want to have too many children in the house. Because if the Turks came through and checked on the families, they would know that they were harboring, Armenian children, and he also told them, whatever you do, do not speak Armenian in the household, because if they hear you, they will kill you. And anyway, so at some point the tricks did come through, and they were safe. And then this man gave them a donkey, I guess, and put the two kids on there and said to them, go that way, which is like going from here to Boston. And he said, there's an orphanage there, and they'll take care of you. And her sister, who was at another home, found out about it, and she ran away. She was just a little kid, barefooted. She ran and ran and ran until she caught up with them. My mother said her feet were bleeding, and but she was so happy because she wanted to be with them. So they got to Harput. It's a city, a big city in Turkey, and they got there, and she says there was no orphanage. There were just burned out houses in smoky black mattresses, and she says we'd have 10 kids sleeping on a mattress, 5 up and 5 down. And she says, and the hunger was terrible. They had an allotment of 3 times a day. They'd get a glass of water, 2 raisins, and a little piece of onion, and a little teeny, about a 1-inch thickness piece of bread, wide, 1 inch wide piece of bread, 3 times a day, to keep them from starvation. And at some point, they said there was an orphanage someplace else. But she says they went from one orphanage to another in various countries, in Turkey, Syria, Greece, Lebanon. They made the rounds. There was no food anywhere. And she said that the children were dying left and right. And she remembers the people in charge said, whatever you do, do not eat these certain weeds, because the kids were so hungry they were eating, trying to find blades of grass and weeds to eat, but some were poisonous, and some kids got poisoned from that. So they had a lot of hardships in the orphanages. She was in the orphanage until she was 23 years old, and her brother from Beirut, he was in Syria. I'm sorry, in Syria. He found her and brought her to his house. Now, he was living in one room in Syria. The father, the mother, her brother and sister-in-law, and their 3 children. And now they got 3 more kids. There's 8 of them in one little room, But they were happy because they had survived. They had survived. They made it, Whereas a lot of them never, ever came out of there. They lost so much of their families, and so horribly. And, but my mother was saved by a very nice Turkish family who they were friends with. It wasn't the people that were doing the killing, it was the government that had planned it and did it. Not your friends and not your neighbors, my mother always said if it wasn't for their family, she would have been dead. So there's a lot to be grateful for. And how she got to this country was my uncle that I told you had come here in 1912. He had just menial jobs, but he saved his money nickel by nickel. And by 1928, he had saved $1,000. And he found a single Armenian man in this country and sent him overseas to my mother to marry her and to bring her here. And that's what she did. That was her oldest brother, whatever he said now. He was the father figure. She married him and she came here for freedom. And a lot of the Armenian men that had come in 1912 did the same thing. They went back and married these orphans to bring them here and to give them another life. And my mother, certainly did have a decent life here in this country. She had freedom and bread. Bread was very, very important to my mother. In her older years, when my mother ended up getting Alzheimer's in her late years, and my brother Peter would call her and say, "Mom, is there anything you need?" She said, "I need some bread." Well, he would go there. We used to have the big bread boxes. That was full. The freezer was full. The refrigerator was full of bread. She always wanted bread. That's all she could really remember at that time, from the orphanage. And, and being hungry. She didn't want to go hungry. That was very important. My mother always said, "God bless America. This is the country that put a roof over my head and gave me bread to eat. Had bread on my table." And she said, "God bless President Roosevelt, because he's the one that came up with Social Security." And that was, for her, everything was a comfort, because my folks were poor, but there was a little income for her in her old age. Every year, or every couple of years, we try to present it to the Congress, and each time we get a few more votes. But I understand why this country is not pushing to do that, is because Turkey is an ally of this country. And so I understand that. And the people that are involved with various things, in the Congress or in the presidency or whatever, I know that they understand that there was a genocide, even though it's been denied. But it's very hard for them to have any conflicts with Turkey, and I understand that. If you only could see the tears. As a child, I grew up having people come to the house and tell their stories. And my mother's is, a pretty simple story. She didn't see the blood and the gore and the axes and bayonets and all the horrible things that were done to women and children and men. There were terrible things that were done. She didn't see that part of it, thank God. She heard of it. But there are other people that had come to my house, our house, and would talk about what had happened to them and their families and how they got away. And they have, I shouldn't say great stories. I don't want to say that. They're horrible stories, really. My mom lived to be 94, and she had Alzheimer's, and in time she couldn't walk anymore. She couldn't feed herself anymore. She was in a wheelchair. She didn't know us anymore. She didn't know our names or anything like that. And about every 10 minutes, she would say, "A gun, a gun, a gun," with the tears rolling down her face. And that meant they came. That was the meaning that the Turkish officials were coming through to look for Armenian children. And, every now and then in the household they were saying, "Egan," that they're coming, And that's the only thing she remembered, which was very, very heartrending. It was really sad. There's a lot to be grateful for.